Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. We are in the thick of the holiday season, aren't we? It is just flying by. I can't believe that we are less than 2 weeks from the end of this year and about to start another year. I hope you're doing well. Hope that whatever holidays you're celebrating, you are enjoying them, not putting too much stress on yourself, as sometimes happens this time of year. I mentioned the last episode, I think I mentioned it, that my husband and some friends and I were going to go to a Christmas market over the weekend, and this was in our little village here in Portugal. It was my very first European Christmas market. I was so excited. They have these little huts that, instead of just like booths that I would think of in, I've been to like Christmas craft fairs, Christmas bazaars, those sorts of things. So it's kind of like that, but outside, and instead of like a table, you get this adorable little hut, for lack of a better word. Those of you who have been to them, you're probably rolling your eyes at me right now for my very poor descriptions, but if you just look up pictures of a European Christmas market, you'll see these little huts, cabins, caves. Where did that come from? Anyway, wooden structures that the people have their food or their crafts. There was somebody that crocheted really adorable amigurumi that I loved, of course. And we ate and walked around. It was 62 degrees, so I was wearing a short sleeve shirt, and my husband bought us all Christmas beanies that lit up, and we all wore them and looked like total dorks. Loved it. Santa and his elf came out at one point and danced to Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas, and then a Portuguese song that I did not recognize, because I haven't lived here long enough yet, and then a song that our South African friends were very excited about, that they knew, and our one friend went out and danced with Santa and the elves and a bunch of other people, because it's a line dance. And so, I think a good time was had by all. I told my husband, and I'm really glad we started with the Christmas market in our village, because, there was maybe 20 booths at most, and it's very small, but very cute, very quaint. And I think if we'd started somewhere like, I don't know, Vienna, or somewhere in France, or somewhere in Norway, or something like that, where they're really big, and I might not have appreciated our little village Christmas market as much as I do, because it was my first one. So now I can just branch out and go find other ones and go exploring, which I can't wait to do. But that was our experience, and we're going to do it again, and I'm going to go find other ones next year in different towns, different countries, whatever. I'm sure you'll hear about it in a year if you're still listening to the podcast. So speaking of the podcast, and why you probably are listening, not to hear about my European Christmas market experience, you're here for the books and the authors, and I have both, of course. This episode I am speaking with author Kim Hayes about her novel Pesticide, and this was fun for a lot of reasons, but the first reason is that she lives in Switzerland, so she was almost in the same time zone. Since we moved, I have not been speaking with people in similar time zones as often. It does happen more than I expected it to, but she lives in Switzerland, which was an hour ahead of me, and so of course, either before or after the interview, I don't remember which, I asked her about Christmas in Switzerland and Christmas markets. See, it all comes back to my personal interest in Christmas markets. But we had a very fun conversation, and we did talk about the book in addition to me asking her impertinent questions about Christmas. So let me go ahead and give you the description from the back of the book. Bern, Switzerland, known for its narrow cobblestone streets, decorative fountains, and striking towers. Yet dark currents run through this charming medieval city and beyond to the idyllic farmlands that surround it. When a rave on a hot summer night erupts into violent riots, a young man is found the next morning bludgeoned to death with a policeman's club. Seasoned detective Juliana Linder is assigned to the case. That same day, an elderly organic farmer turns up dead and drenched with pesticide. Enter Juliana's younger and distractingly attractive colleague Renzo Donatelli to investigate the second murder. Juliana's disappointment that they're on two different cases is tinged with relief. Her home life is complicated enough without the risk of a fling. But when an unexpected discovery ties the two victims into a single case, Juliana and Renzo are thrown closer together than ever before. Dangerously close. Will Juliana be able to handle the threats to her marriage and to her assumptions about the police? If she wants to prevent another murder, she'll have to put her life on the line and her principles. So that is the description of Pesticide. When I first started reading this and before everything kind of came out in the story, I thought this is a very strange title for what I am reading initially. It's the second murder that brings in the pesticide, as you heard in the description. And I never read the descriptions before I read the book. For when I'm finding a book for myself to read, I always do. But for the podcast, I never do. I just jump right in. I don't know why that is. But anyway, Pesticide made total sense once I actually got into the story. And for you, there's no mystery because I read you the back of the book if you didn't skip ahead. At any rate, this is suspense. It's a mystery. It's a bit of a thriller. I really like Juliana as one of the main characters. She is in her 40s. She is attracted to a man who is about 12 years younger than her, and none of this is shocking, but it isn't always the combination that you see in books, especially when there are romantic over or undertones in those books. So for me, as also a woman in her 40s, it's just nice to read a book that has a main character that I identify with. And I can identify with women in their 20s and 30s and remember what those decades were like as well. But it is nice to see myself sometimes in books. And it's not like I don't get a lot of representation in books, but age-wise it is nicer to see someone closer to my own age. So enough on that. I'm going to let you listen to the interview so you can hear Kim talk about the book. Again, the book is called Pesticide. The author is Kim Hayes. Let's go ahead and get to that interview. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure.
I'm very happy to have you here to talk about your novel, Pesticide. But before we do that, if you could share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Well, I think the most important thing about me right now is that I live in Bern in Switzerland. And that is why this book, and it's part of the series. So the series is set in Bern in Switzerland. 34 years ago, I married a Swiss, and he and I have lived here ever since. Bern is his hometown. We have a son, and both I and my son are double citizens. So I'm both a Swiss and an American, although I'm always an American inside me, just because that's where I was raised. I've also lived some other interesting places. I lived actually most of my schooling I did in San Juan in Puerto Rico. And then I did my last 2 years of high school in Vancouver. So I've lived in Canada. And I'm lucky. I've lived in some beautiful places. And then I've also spent a year after college living in Stockholm. It's interesting that those are three places, plus Boston, where I lived a lot in the States, and Berkeley, where I did graduate work. They're all on the ocean. And now I live in Switzerland, which has beautiful mountains and is completely landlocked. So I filled up on the ocean in my youth. And now I have to go quite far away to see the ocean.
Yes,
so that's a start, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it. You're very international.
Yes, I am.
Well, I grew up in the mountains, and then I also lived in Berkeley for graduate work, and I live
as you know, in the south of Portugal. So I did the opposite. I grew up in mountains, and then lately I've been living more on the coast, near the ocean.
Enjoying the waves. That must be
Yes.
very nice.
Now, you mentioned that you live in Bern and the books are set in Bern, and the foreword of the book I found very interesting and helpful. You talk about the language that is spoken in this particular area where your book is set. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. And stop me if I get too complicated, because I find this very interesting. But it turns out that not only does Switzerland have 4 official languages, which are French, Italian, a language no one has ever heard of, called Rheto-Romanisch, which is like Latin, and German. But in fact, it isn't German. So although officially on paper, 65% of the people in Switzerland speak German, it is actually an unwritten, what they actually speak is an unwritten language called Schweizerdeutsch, or Swiss German. And each area has its own dialect. So I live in Bern, and the people in Bern, which in Bernese dialect is called Baden, the people here speak a form of German that most Germans can't understand. I have learned to speak it, but it has taken me a long time. And I do sometimes mix it with the German of Germany. This dialect isn't a written language, and it's pronounced, the vowel there, it has its own words that don't exist in High German or German, but it also has very different pronunciations. So I think when we think dialect, we tend to think Americans. We have very few dialects, if any, in the States. We have accents. But this is really, as I said, as different. I would say Bernese German is as different from the German, official German that's written down, as, say, Norwegian is from Swedish. So it could just as easily be considered another language.
Yes. And actually, I was having a conversation about this last night because I was in a group of people, several of whom were German, and then one person who grew up in South Africa, but his family has German heritage somewhere, but his mother now lives in Vienna, and he lives in Portugal, so he's very multicultural, but
international.
Yes, but we were talking about this. I was telling them about the foreword of your book, and it sparked this whole conversation about other German dialects and other little areas where there's pockets of German that are very different. If you tried to understand them and you spoke, maybe you've learned German as a second language, you probably wouldn't understand them.
Yes, and this I also have learned as I've lived in Europe. It's just something we don't think about in the United States, I think most people, that a person who lives in Sicily, when they and a person who lives in Venice, if they have to speak written Italian to understand each other, but the actual thing that they speak every day, the dialects of Venice and Sicily, say Palermo, are so different that they could not understand each other. So this is true all over Europe, that people in different regions speak a very different form of the language.
And you were worried that you would get too technical, but we could spend a whole hour talking about this. I'd be happy because I find it fascinating. But we
should get to the book, right?
Yes, we should talk about the book because you worked hard on it, and we would like to promote it.
And yes, I do want to promote it and talk about it, but it's already time for the first break of the podcast. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with author Kim Hayes about her book Pesticide, and we are finally going to get to the overview of that book.
So give an overview of the story, please.
Yeah, gladly. Okay. Well, I don't want to tell too much because it's a mystery. So of course it's full. I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but it's a murder mystery with two police detectives who belong to the Cantonal Police of Bern. And in fact, the series, and this book is the first in a series, Pesticide is the first, is called Polizei Bern, or the Bern Police series. In the book, Pesticide begins with two murders. One as a young man in his 20s that's killed during a riot, and the other body that's found the same weekend is 20 miles away, an old man, a man over 70, killed on his farm, and his body, the farmer's body, has been sprayed with pesticide. There seems to be no connection between these two dead men, and two different detectives who have worked together are assigned one to each case. And it won't be very surprising for readers to hear, this is not a spoiler, that it turns out that these cases are connected. And so as the book progresses, of course, the two detectives have to solve the mystery of who killed these two men.
Yes. And one thing that I found fascinating as I was reading was, I've read a lot of American mysteries set in America, and I've read a lot of mysteries set in England. And so I kind of feel like I understand a little bit about those processes and how the police work and how investigations happen. But this was a completely different setting for me. So did you have to do a lot of research about the way the police work and, just how everything works in terms of investigating a homicide in Bern and in Switzerland?
Yes, I did do a lot of research. And some of it was reading, just understanding the system better. The court system is also different. So how someone is judged if they are accused of a crime is different here. But yes, I'm very lucky that I have a policewoman as a neighbor. She is not, she's as nice as and interesting as my detective, but not at all similar to her. But it has been very helpful for me to be able to ask her questions. And I've also, visited the Bern police station, talked to other police, and I've talked quite a bit to district attorneys, people who, obviously work on the cases. They're also helpful when you need to know more about a whole new police system that you can't just say I'm sure there are mystery writers that I'm sure they all do good research, but they occasionally think, I can't assume anything is what I'm trying to say. I can't think about any detective story I've seen on TV, whether it's British or American, and say, oh, I know how they do that from TV or from reading. No, I don't. I really have to check it because it is different here.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that. I thought it was really interesting to read about a different process, and just when you hit those points and you go, oh yeah, okay, that's different than what I was expecting to happen.
Yeah. I'm glad it's interesting. Of course, I don't want to make it a challenge. The purpose of the book is to entertain, but I think I hope that's part of the entertainment.
Yeah, and I'm always fascinated by research with authors, because you have to do so much research, but you can only put a very small percentage of that into the actual story because you don't want to bog readers down.
Yes.
So to find that balance between explaining and over-explaining.
Yes, that was very much true for me with organic farming. I would say that, what inspired me when I thought about what was most, although obviously I wanted to write a mystery, when I thought about a theme, I'm so interested. I've never been a farmer, but I was so interested in learning more about organic farming and why is it different from regular farming and what kind of work is involved. And in a sense, you could say, what is the point of it? I mean, we know it's good for the environment, but what does that exactly mean? And so I learned so much about organic farming. And then, as you say, I had to be very careful the famous phrase for writers is when they say, oh, this is so boring, it's only an information dump. That's the phrase that often is used by critics is, oh, this isn't interesting. And I feel from, from good reviews that I've had that I didn't do that. But you're right, it's very difficult to put in just the right amount of information. And of course, every reader is different. Some people are fascinated to learn about organic farming, and some people wish there wasn't as much as there was. So you never know, but you try.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more about the two detectives, Juliana and Renzo? What about each of them do you think is going to resonate with readers?
Well, I am extremely fond of both of them. This is something that happens when you create characters and you think about them a lot. But even before they took shape in my mind, I was very sure that I wanted to have detectives, and I did want to have two because it makes it more fun to give two different perspectives on things. I wanted them to not be loners. I read many mysteries, and I love mysteries, and I love mysteries that feature loner detectives who, for whatever reason, live on their own. Sometimes they also have problems with alcohol or drugs, or they're different in some way. I have nothing against this, but I really wanted to create two people with very real lives. I mean, being lonely can be a real life as well, of course, but I mean, who had a family, who had spouses, who had kids, who had the problem of having to balance a very demanding job, which policing is, with trying to live a normal family life. And because I think that in not just police, but most of us have this problem. And I think that if you create a police person, male or female, who's just on their own, it's too easy for them. The reality is you're constantly balancing. So, but that's kind of a philosophical thing. What I think is nice about Juliana and Renzo is that I tried to make them both tough in a way, as a police man or woman has to be, and vulnerable. And one of the ways they're vulnerable, as readers will quickly find, is that they are in love with each other, and yet or at least very attracted to each other, and very interested in each other, and very fond of each other also as friends. They work together a lot. And the woman detective, Juliana, is 12 years older than Renzo, than the man. So he's in his mid-30s, and she's in her mid to late 40s. And this is really a problem for them, because they are very much embedded in their families. So they have a dilemma. So besides having to solve the mysteries in the books, they have to work out how to cope with their feelings about each other.
And I will take a side note to say that I love that you made Juliana a little older than Renzo, and also not the kind of, often when you read books, the main characters, especially female characters, they seem to be 27, 28, right in that age. So I love that you made her a little older. She has a teenager and a 10-year-old. She's a little older than Renzo. It's just a nice representation for women who may not see themselves in middle age in a lot of their favorite books.
Yes, I mean, she really, and yet, obviously she's attractive and interesting and smart and all, and I wanted to make her very secure. I mean, she has problems, and like all of us, she has her inner demons or whatever, but she's not worrying about her weight or something. She's just there, and she's secure about herself. And that was important to me. And another thing about Renzo that I wanted to mention, because we were talking about different cultures, is Renzo's parents are Italian. So, and they came to Switzerland, as many Italians did in the 50s, to work at factory jobs and jobs that the Swiss needed them as a workforce. And so he's born and grown up in Switzerland, but he still thinks of himself as an Italian in many ways. And because he has a lot of Italian qualities, he allows me to comment on the Swiss. So there are no Americans in so far, I've written more than the first book, and there are no Americans. But Renzo, as a non-Swiss at heart, is allowed to comment occasionally on when Swiss do things that he thinks are strange. So he gives me a cultural and outside of the culture, the Swiss culture. He gives me a new perspective, which I really, enjoy working with.
Yes, because as a person who moved there later in your life, you would have some of those same perspectives of this is different than what I am expecting.
Exactly. It may not be bad or good, but it allows it allows you not to. He does not take everything that the Swiss do for granted.
Yes,
as I don't.
Let's go ahead and take the second break of this episode. When we come back, Kim will be talking about character development. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Kim Hayes.
When it comes to your characters, then, do you have a really good picture of them before you start writing, or do you like to let them evolve as you write, or is it a combination?
It's such an interesting question for all writers. I think how do their characters develop? And I think that I will say something that probably you've heard many people say. There's a point in writing which doesn't happen all the time, that when you're writing and your writing starts to flow, and flow can exist in any kind of work. I'm sure you can have flow when you're doing something totally different, that you just feel your work is going well, you're just into it, you're not distracted. But in writing, this is very important. And so when it's flowing, your characters seem to just speak for themselves. It's not magic, it's nothing mystical, but you're so embedded, I think, in their world and in what's happening to them, that they just develop themselves. Of course, it's coming out of your brain, but you don't. So to answer your question and not be so long-winded, I don't really think, I think about what kind of, before I started, I thought about, the older woman, the younger man, he's very handsome, and that could actually be a problem for him in his work. Sometimes people think he must be gay. Other times people, are embarrassed by it. And some of his male colleagues think it's weird. And all kinds of things that I thought of beforehand. But then how they actually behave often is not something that I can decide before I'm actually writing. And I'm sure you've heard this before, by the way, haven't you?
I have, yeah. Characters often surprise the authors.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I love those stories, because you don't think of a character that you are creating and have created. You wouldn't think it would surprise you, but I hear it all the time.
Yes. Well, of course, sometimes the plot demands you to do something. Like, at one point in Pesticide, for the plot to work out later on, I really need for Renzo not to have his cell phone with him. Because, of course, cell phones spoil a lot of suspense when people have their cell phone and why don't they call for backup, or why doesn't, so you have these moments where you have to, and that makes me have to then, in this particular case, I have him get kind of drunk. He's taken painkillers, and he has a little bit too much to drink on top of the painkillers. And this, this is something I'm giving away, but it doesn't matter right now. And he forgets to get his phone out of the car. And I think this could happen to anyone. But of course, me creating this whole picture of something happening to him is based on plot. So sometimes you can't just be creative. When you're writing a mystery, you have to think about how each step is actually going to happen. And that sometimes influences what your character is going to do and say.
Yeah, I would imagine. Speaking of mysteries and writing mysteries, what do you think about this genre draws you to write within it?
So why mysteries? Well, my mother loved mysteries, and she read lots of them. And so for me, it seemed normal for people to read mysteries. And by the way, I do read lots of other things myself. I mean, I like science fiction, I like romances, I like fantasy, and I like literary fiction, just plain novels, and some nonfiction too. So, but I love mysteries because I read mysteries as a child, and then, Nancy Drew, and Sherlock Holmes, and then I started to develop more and more interest in different mystery writers. I think, it was partially because I I think you might as well write what you like, what you read. But I also think that I like books that are fast, that are entertaining, where that don't, where there's a puzzle, where people are trying to solve a puzzle. But I also like the aspect of mysteries that involves right and wrong. So I think many people who read mysteries must feel this way, that there's something very nice about the way at the end of a mystery, there's a resolution. I mean, there are mysteries written where the killer gets away or the detective is killed. I mean, the hero, there are mysteries where all kinds of other things happen besides the triumph of good over evil. But generally, the good guys win at the end of a mystery. And I am, let's say, childish enough to like that. And I think many of us do. I don't know. Do you feel that way?
Oh, yeah, I don't necessarily think it's childish. I just like sometimes when I'm reading, I want to know that things are going to work out. So I have certain authors or certain genres that I read because I know it's either going to have a happy ending, or the mystery will be solved, or, there will be resolution. And it's not like real life where you don't always get resolution.
Exactly. I mean, exactly the point. Real life gives us enough situations without a resolution or with a sad ending. So yes. we might as well escape into books that give us more of a satisfying end.
I completely agree. I know you have the second one. The second one's coming out in 2023 for this series, correct?
That is right. The second one is not only written, it has a cover. It can be pre-ordered, and it's called Sons and Brothers, and it's coming out in April. And I'm really, really pleased with it. I don't know if you want me to should I tell something about it, or
yeah, if you can give what information you can that doesn't spoil anything in the first one. I know that's always a challenge, but
I know. Well, this book, the book starts out with a man has drowned in the Aare, which is the river that surrounds Bern and is very much, as what the Mississippi must be to New Orleans. The Aare, it's not as big as the Mississippi, but our river is to us, a city that has a river in it, and the river basically circles around it. We're never very far from this river. And so the cover has a river on it, and that is not for no reason. A man drowns in the Aare, out walking his dog, and it turns out when they find the body that he has been he's been punched, and he's been possibly held, not tied up. It's clear that he's been in some sort of fight before he drowned. And it's the last person that you would think that would happen to. He's over 70. He's a cardiac surgeon. He's from an aristocratic family. It starts with our detectives, our beloved Juliana and Renzo, need to figure out what happened to this man. It's clear that it looks very much like someone killed him. And they start to talk to his family and friends and find out more and more about his life and his family. And the more they research, the more it appears that one of his three sons may have been involved in his death. And I'll stop there, except to say that something that comes out in this book, as I put organic farming into pesticide as a kind of background, the background in this book, which I very much enjoyed researching, but it's something sad, is that for almost 200 years in Switzerland, it was common for children to be, sometimes as young as 7, 8, or 9, to be taken away from their families and contracted out to farmers to work. They were taken away if it was perceived that they had, say, a single mother. They were poor families. Sometimes parents actually gave their children into the system because they felt they couldn't take care of them. And they ended up on farms very often in very bad conditions. And sometimes, obviously, there was physical abuse, sexual abuse, and certainly they were worked very, very hard. And this went on into the 1970s. So we're not talking about, it's easy for us to imagine something like this happening in many countries, including even the United States, and certainly the kids being put out to work. But this is something that continued until so recently in Switzerland that it's quite shocking. And it was actually local officials, who would decide that a mom, especially, as I said, a mother with illegitimate children, or the father had died or had left the family, she can't raise these kids, they're getting in trouble at school, we just take them away and put them on farms to work, or in orphanages, but many of them were put to work. So it exists. This situation is shown in this book, and I think it's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. In terms of the series, do you have an arc in mind, or are you going to write stories and as long as they come to you? How many books do you envision for the series?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer. So all I can do is have fun speculating. I've written the 3rd book. It's done. I'm working on the 4th book. So I think, and I'm coming along well, so I think I can guarantee 4 books. Assuming my publisher wants them. I would like to write a 5th book, but I can't say that I see myself, there are mystery writers who've written 20 and 30 books in a series, and I don't see myself going that far. So we'll see. But I think, to the point of 5 or 6, let's say that. That's something I think I can't promise, but I feel pretty good about saying. If people invest themselves emotionally a little bit, they will get some more books out of this.
All right, that's fair. So in terms of writing, when did you start writing? Is it something that you always wanted to do, or did you decide to write for publication later in life? How did that work for you?
I always enjoyed writing, and I wrote because I got a PhD. So I wrote a PhD dissertation. And of course, I wrote in high school and college and my master's and all of that. So I did academic writing, and I had jobs where I did freelance articles. I wrote funding proposals for nonprofit organizations and press releases. So I could go on. I had a number of jobs that involved writing, but I just didn't start writing a novel or short stories. And I think it was because I was afraid. I somehow didn't, I guess I thought it was something that wasn't like I was dying to do it, but it was something that I imagined doing and then was afraid I wouldn't be able to do. So there was a kind of nervousness there, like if I start and I can't do it, I'll be disappointed in myself. I think I felt that way. I've thought about this since. That's what I've come up with. But when my son went off to college, I had a job then, but I still thought, if I am going to write a novel, this is it, now or never. I think this is the moment. And I talked to my husband because it meant cutting back. And then eventually I stopped doing the cross-cultural training work that I was doing then. And he was fine with it. So that, I think, is an important thing to say, is when you decide to start writing, it isn't just an emotional decision. Sometimes it's a financial decision because it's going to take a lot of your time, or it might, unless you can do it a half an hour a day. So that was when I started and this was actually 2012. So this was it was basically 10 years ago that I decided to start to write. And it, it worked. I mean, it didn't but it wasn't easy. So, I mean, that's, it took me then, I think this is something, I don't know if this is something you want to pursue, but I think it's important for people who are listening who might be interested in ever becoming a writer. From the time I finished the first mystery until I got Pesticide accepted by a publisher, then it takes time to have a book prepared. It was 6.5 years. I did not find anyone to publish the book for 6.5 years. And that is a long time.
Yes, it is.
That is a long time, and that is patience and commitment and all kinds of good qualities. Let's go ahead and take the final break of this episode, and we'll be continuing this conversation when we come back. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with author Kim Hayes. Before the break, she was talking about writing, publishing, etc., and that this particular book took 6.5 years to get published. And so we are picking up with that conversation, and let's get back to the interview.
Yeah, and that's good for people to know. Traditional publishing takes longer, I think, than people realize sometimes.
I'm sure that there are people who write brilliant books. They send it out to 5 agents. One agent loves it, and then that's it. This does happen. I'm sure it does to people, but it's very much the exception. And I do know a lot of people who worked very hard before they got published. And also, I know people who have self-published because they didn't find a publisher. And in many cases, they're quite happy about that. And their books have sold. I think that this is, that's something that what happened to me was when my first book, I couldn't get anyone to be interested in the first book. I wrote a second one. And eventually, before I even had found a publisher for that one, I started the third one. So, some of it is you have to like to write because otherwise, and I think as I said, you have to have the time and be able to afford to write. Because I kept on going. And in the end, Pesticide is actually not the first book I wrote. It's the second book I wrote. And the second book I wrote, I worked on more, and it is now, the first book I wrote is now going to be the second. Sorry, I'm mixing this up, but they exchanged places. But it took a lot of editing. I think that's another thing people may not realize is that, you write a book and then you write it again and again until you get it right. It's very time consuming.
Yes. And you may find yourself a little sick of it by the time you're done writing it or editing it.
Yes. Yes, well, both. And I also think, that it's very easy to get discouraged, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. I think all writers get discouraged. I think, people have, in films, people show writers with writer's block, and there is writer's block, but I think more it's just the discouragement of writing and coming back and writing it better. And it's a hard job, but it's fun. Otherwise, it's fun. And that's why people do it. If they didn't find it fun, they certainly don't do it to earn money. I can tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you take time to read for yourself, you mentioned, you do read in a variety of genres, but what are your go-to authors when you're reading for yourself?
I do read a lot of mysteries, and I am a great fan of, for example, because I write police procedurals. Who knows what came first, the chicken or the egg? But I write police procedurals, and I love to read police procedurals. And I think Michael Connelly, who is, the father, quote unquote, of Harry Bosch and Mickey Haller, and now who's the Lincoln lawyer, and now he has a woman detective, Renee Ballard, that he's using. He is brilliant. He is really as far as American police procedural writers go, I guess he's probably, at the top. And it's not just that he's very well known, he's also very, very good. And then when it comes, I like a lot of English writers, but I want as Tana or Tana, I'm not how Tana French, Tana French, and Cleves. They both have police detectives. And yeah, Deborah Crombie is an author, is a mystery writer I really like. Julia Spencer Fleming, these are Americans. Louise Penny is Canadian. I think a lot of people read her books, and I think now she just has a brand new series on TV. So I'm only mentioning mystery writers, but I do read a lot of them.
Well, it makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I know you have a website, so if you can share the website along with any social media that you are active on.
Well, I use as my kind of social media name, I use, written as one word, Kim Hayes Byrne, or Bern. And so and Hayes is spelled without an E. That's important because it's always, it's not the normal spelling. So Kim Hayes Byrne. So www.kimhayesbyrne.com is my website. And then my Twitter and my Facebook accounts are also under, would you like me to spell it out, or is this good enough?
I think it's probably good. I think that's good enough.
Kim Hayes, Bern is Byrne. And that's that. I think people can find me if they would enter that into Google. They would come up with some of my social media. I have a blog, and I post about twice a month on something to do with either Switzerland or mysteries or Bern itself, or sometimes just something that's in my mind. But so it just depends but usually it's something to do with Switzerland and some issue that's to do with my books as well.
All right, thank you. Well, Kim, we have talked about a variety of different things during our time together, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to highlight?
Well, I think I did say this, but I've talked a lot about my mysteries. I'm going to use the plural since the second one will be out in a few months, and the series in terms of the background information and and sort of morality, right and wrong. But what's really most important for me is that they should be a lot of fun to read, that they should be entertaining, that they should be exciting, that they should that people should like the characters. And I've gotten enough feedback from readers and also from reviewers that I feel good that they really are entertaining and that people really do like the characters. I've been really touched by how many people have put in an email to me or have put in a review on a blog or something, or in Kirkus or Publishers Weekly, that they really like Juliana and Renzo and would really like to read more about them. And I think that is much more important than anything about the background, organic farming, whatever, that people just have fun. That's what I hope that anybody who gets the book will experience, is a good time.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about pesticide, as well as the second book that's coming out soon. I really appreciate it.
Good. Well, I had a lot of fun, and it's always fun to talk about your own work. So that was great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you once again to Kim for joining me to talk about pesticide and a little bit about the next book in the series. I am excited to see what happens to Juliana and Renzo next, where this next case and or cases takes them, and also to see where the series goes and how many books end up actually being in the series. If you are a fan of mystery, especially mysteries set in a different country than where you live, unless you live in Switzerland, and then it's not that, but that's okay. You might still like mysteries. But as I said in the interview, for me, I've read a lot of American mysteries. I've read a lot of English mysteries, some French mysteries even. But I think this was the first mystery I've read set in Switzerland. So it was really fun for me to just experience a different process. And you get a lot of some of the same themes that you might be used to, but some different procedures than what I was used to personally. So I very much enjoyed that part of it. But if you are a fan, then you should definitely check this out. We're getting closer to Christmas if you're still Christmas shopping. But ebook, audiobook. This is an audiobook, so if you're looking for something for the mystery lover in your life, maybe this is something that you want to check out in e-version, because hey, you can get it quickly and you don't have to wrap it. So that might be an incentive. At any rate, you should definitely check it out if it sounds interesting. Also, check out the next episode. This one will be on Friday. We have another Friday episode this week. That episode will be with author David Ellis about his novel Look Closer. Suspense, psychological thriller, lots and lots of twists and turns. And David's going to talk about some of those twists and turns, but not too many of them, because you definitely have to read that book to experience them fully. So join me for that episode. As always, if you are a fan of this podcast, do me some quick favors. Like, follow, subscribe, all those good things, so you will get new episodes as soon as they come out. Leave a review on whatever podcast platform you listen to this podcast on. That is extremely helpful. And follow on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I love hearing from you, so come find me. In the meantime, I hope this holiday week is going well for you. Maybe you're spending extra time with family. I hope that is wonderful and enjoyable and just filling you with love and calmness. Calmness, especially this time of year. But no matter what's going on this week, or any week, of course, you know what my main wish for you is, and that is that your life will afford you plenty of time to get yourself lost in as many books as you can stand up to. Thank you so much. Talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.